Hey, what's up? Hello, griefsense familia. How we doing today? If you don't already know what the movement is about, it's about normalizing griefsense. What does that mean? That means normalizing conversations around death. And we do that through holding space to talk about loss, confronting our mortality. And we also do this through the lens of social justice, creative expression, community care, as well as pop culture. So as you interact with these episodes, please reflect on how griefsense shows up in your life. And if you have a story that you'd like to share with us, please feel free to reach out. You can reach us at info@griefsense.com via email. Now with that, hope you enjoyed today's conversation. Welcome back, listeners of griefsense. I am so happy to have my guest Antonio Morales with us today. He is the founder of the Liberated Self Therapeutic Services. And I am so excited for our conversation because we're going to talk about all the things, y'all, between oppression, between white supremacy, between grief, between honoring our ancestors. I mean, this conversation is going to be a really good one. So buckle up. It's going to be great. It's going to be a great ride. I'm super grateful for how often I get to meet really dope people off of LinkedIn. And because of Pavel Martinez, another griefsense guest, that's how I met Antonio. So it's just the beauty of social media, the beauty of connection, and just the power of storytelling and how we are literally unified by traumas that we've experienced, by really hardships that we've had to overcome. But we unfortunately are bounded by our oppression. But in that, we can find liberation and power and just connection and community. So without further ado, Antonio, please feel free to introduce yourself and we'll jump into today's conversation.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much, Mimi, for inviting me onto your platform to have this conversation. Because I'm thinking, I think about these conversations around sort of grief and loss, and thinking about the people that have passed on from our family members, our loved ones, as a celebration of them. You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
Like, to focus on conversations that sort of center our loved ones who we lost, I think really is important because it keeps them alive, right? And I think that's what I love about this particular conversation, or these types of conversations, is that we're able to celebrate the people who we love the most, or the people we cared about the most, and who are no longer with us. So that, to me, that's a celebratory thing. I'm just saying.
Yes. Amen.
And so, briefly, my name is Antonio Morales, as you just said. I'm the founder of the Liberated Self Therapeutic Services, which is a mental health private practice that's really sort of framed around looking at the adverse impact of white supremacy and how we work through that, specifically as Black and brown folk. And so I provide psychotherapeutic services as well as programming, which looks like trainings or workshops that allow people to have conversations around their lived experience in an experiential way. So it's really the design of a lot of my programmings, like the Liberated Self Seminar, for example, is really designed to have people sort of have breakthroughs, despite the fact that they might be experiencing an experience inside of an oppressive context. And with that being said, the whole point of my work is really psychological liberation, because I feel like when we're thinking about our healing and evolutionary process, we need to be liberated psychologically first, in my opinion, in order to then have access to our ability to heal and evolve as human beings.
I love everything you said because we are literally conditioned to think how we think today, right? And I love on your website, you talk about this internalized oppression, right? This internalized colonization that we are all essentially programmed by since we are kids. And we are essentially forced to assimilate into the dominant culture, right? And in doing so, we are directly removed from our roots. Our history is censored and honestly outright just completely taken away from us. And that benefits the dominant culture. That's just what that is. And so I love the work that you're doing, especially I love when mental health professionals and therapeutic services center this decolonization, framework and principles, because it's very important to realize that therapy was originally created, right, so that people could go back to work. It's like
Mm.
for you to talk about what you need to talk about, but we gonna do what we gotta do to get you go back to work. Okay. And we are more, and something we often talk about on the Grief Sense podcast is we are more than what we produce. We are more
That's
than the
right.
traumas that we've had to overcome. And we are resilient, but why are we resilient? We are resilient because we had no other choice. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that with our conversation today, we're going to get into that being resilient, while it is something that I think is natural for our people, it's literally in our DNA. We stand on the shoulders of the ancestors that we're going to honor, right? And
Yeah, absolutely.
because they were, we are, and that's something I talk about frequently on here. But
Mm-hmm.
oh, you get me so excited! Like this too much. My brain is like going rapid fire, but we are here. I'm so grateful you are here. But Antonio, I would love for you to, as much as, as little or as much as you want to share with your story. Before we jump into that, is there anyone that you would like to honor today? And it's definitely okay if there's multiple people.
I absolutely want to honor someone right now, but I also want to say something to what you said around
Absolutely.
sort of our lived experience, particularly as Black and Brown marginalized folk. One of the ways that we internalize white supremacy is like what happens a lot of times, and we're not really aware of, is the way we internalize it is like we create another version of ourselves, which I call the oppressed self, that
Mm-hmm.
actually ends up running our lives, right? And so, and the reason why that self, which is like a doppelganger version of ourselves, um, and so it's the humanized version of ourselves, the inferiorized version of ourselves. The reason so that version of ourselves, the oppressed self, takes over us in such a way
Mm,
because we live in an environment that's constantly nurturing and feeding that version of the self,
mm,
and it could lead to so many things, right? This adverse impact is really um, thinking about and taking into consideration not only the psychological impact but the spiritual impact, and so how we sort of get under this spell of white supremacy where we exist in a small version, in a sort of shrunken version of ourselves. And so
mm.
the real gist of my work is really being able to have us recognize the oppressed self, that doppelganger that works against us, so that we
Right.
can then tap into the liberated self, which is why
Mm,
it's the Liberated Self Therapeutic Services, because the liberated self is
love
really
it.
the key to sort of having us recognize and exist inside our fullest potentiality. And I think,
Mm,
and sort of thinking about who we're going to honor today, or who am I going to honor today, um, there's no other way in the world that we can honor our ancestors than to become the bestest version of ourselves possible. Because
mm,
back to what you were saying, Mimi, we're standing on our ancestors' shoulders, and there's
mm.
a lot of sacrifice that they had to sort of take on. Whether they knew it or not, whether it was intentional or not, whether it was forced upon them or not, in
Right.
order for us to be here right now, right? And so, if we can see the fullness of our potentiality and live and exist inside of that in life, then we honor our ancestors. And so,
Mm,
with that being said, the one person I want to honor today, and there's many, but who sticks out for me today is Mami Helen, who is my informally adopted mom. And
mm.
so she is like my spiritual mother, who when I was a little kid, like sometimes moms, because they're dealing with stuff like poverty and lack of resources, that they just sort of leave you on somebody else's stoop. Well, that's what happened to me. And
Mm.
so my biological mom left me on someone else's stoop, in essence. And the
Wow.
woman, Mommy Helen, took me in as a child. Even though my biological mom was still in my life, Mommy Helen so became her partner in raising me. And so I sort of
Mm.
grew up with two moms. So the
Beautiful.
non-biological mom, which is Mommy Helen, and then my biological mom. And so Mommy Helen passed away back in she had a stroke in 2000, and I think it was 8, and then she passed away in I believe 2009. It was a long time ago. But here's the thing, the reason why I get the dates mixed up is because Mommy Helen has never left me. Like she
Mm.
literally sometimes, because I literally dream about her often, like maybe 3 or 4 times out of the week. So she's
Wow.
constant since the
So she
moment that
here.
she's gone. She's here. And one time I said, "Ma, well, you have somewhere to go, like I don't know, like heaven or whatever. Like, why are you still here? Like, are you supposed to be like on some like universal journey, like floating through space? I don't know." And she's never left, and it's so interesting because and here's the thing about what a blessing that is that Mommy Helen is still around me is that I know that my my adopted brothers and sisters don't see her in dreams, right? But
Mm,
I see her all the time, and I'm like, "Yo, Ma,
mm,
what's good?" And so I don't, it doesn't feel like even though she's crossed physically, she's never left me spiritually, right? She's always
mm.
been consistent, even in death. She's been here with me. So I want to honor
Wow.
Mommy Helen today because last night I did have a dream with her as well. I don't remember what the
Mm.
dream was, but I think she was preparing me for this conversation today. So Mommy Helen, I
Wow.
want to honor her.
Well, Mami Helen, hello. Grateful to meet you in spirit, and thank you for being here and for nurturing this wonderful soul that I have the presence of being in today. Thank you so much for sharing that, and I echo everything you said. I mean, that's literally why we are here. I think it's so powerful that when we take the responsibility and the initiative and the commitment to honor our loved ones after they died in the physical form, right? I think that you kind of open yourself up to, if you are seeking that connection with your loved ones who have transitioned, if you are open to that, if you're open to seeing what can come of that, I think that beautiful things can really happen. Like, just because they are not here in the physical form doesn't mean that you can't still honor them in the way they deserve to. And that's, I live and breathe that daily, like
Yeah,
there's so many interactions that we have today that are influenced by the people who have died in our lives. You know
that's
what I'm
right.
saying? And like
Absolutely.
our mannerisms, the way we talk, the way we handle challenges, like everything, and I just think it's really important to honor them. And I really feel that people who have died were once walking universes. Like, they experienced the whole world, their own traumas, their
Yes.
own milestones, their own accomplishments. Like, and the world deserves to know about that. So that's why I
Yes.
think it's so important.
Like
So yeah,
what you just said to me reminded me that we still exist inside of their legacy. Like the fact that we was touched by the human beings who are no longer with us physically, doesn't mean that their legacy still is not living on within us. And that's a beautiful thing. Like just
absolutely.
like just like being present to that. Like just being present to that is like a beautiful
Yeah.
thing.
And tailing off of that,
Uh-huh, uh-huh.
because inviting people to share their story on this platform, imagine the different Mommy Helens in other people's stories, right? People are going to see themselves in your story. And actually, my mom, I really relates to your story as well, honestly, because she has her biological mother, but she had, my grandmother, who's really my godmother, who basically took us in and helped us out growing up when things were really hard. So it's just beautiful. I just can't wait to see, who we can impact with your story. So just thank you for being here and for sharing it. So
Absolutely, absolutely.
so definitely got some questions for you today,
All right, all right.
and I'm excited. But you talked a little bit about, not so much like remembering what the dream was that you had last night with Mommy Helen, but just this concept of getting ready for this conversation today, or getting ready for conversations like this, right? Because there are going to be times where, if you're not intentionally carving out space to talk about these things, grief, loss, trauma, dealing with everything that comes with that, it's going to hit you unexpectedly or expectedly, if you are intentionally carving that time out. But how, and I know we talked a little bit about it before we hopped on to record, but how would you recommend for people to kind of get in that space, or to get in a healthy space, if you will, to be ready to have these types of conversations? Like, what are some things that you do, or maybe some things that you tell your clients on how to get ready to handle these really tough
Ooh, that's a good
conversations?
question. Well, I mean, obviously, it always depends on people's cultural backgrounds and what their traditions are and their practices. So it really varies depending on where they come from.
Right.
I think that's an important point to make because everyone's culture looks different. Everyone's spiritual practices look different.
Mm,
Um, for me today, when I think, first of all, thinking about this conversation already, because well, I just want to just make sure that I'm clear about like this is a constant conversation for me anyway. Even
same.
when I'm not speaking about it verbally, right? Like even I'm not having a conversation with another human being, like I'm always in touch with sort of the spirit world. Now,
Hmm.
there's so much to be learned about that world for me. There's so much development around that I know I have to sort of embark on as far as a journey. So there's so much left to be seen around that conversation. But how I prepared today, like one of the things that reminds me of like Mami Helen and also my other ancestors is Florida water.
Yep.
So the Florida water is a staple in my crib. Like even when my family comes over and we having a barbecue or we having a family night or whatever it is, like there's gonna be a moment that I'm gonna break out the Florida water. Everybody knows it, okay? Right? So it's like, and so then I'll take the Florida water. This is part of the tradition, right? What I've seen Mami Helen and my abuela Sita do, and they put it on their neck, right, to sort of ground them inside
Yeah.
of whatever space they're in. And so I go right around. I don't care what we're doing. Like if we in the backyard, we in the front, no matter what, I'm coming with the flow of the water and I'm gonna go like this to you. And my
I love
family
it.
knows that this is part of the tradition. And then like and because they know that's part of Abuela Sita, like that's because mostly Abuela Sita is my mother's mom, who is another like figure that has passed on and who exists in my life in such a way still. Different
Hmm.
than Mami Helen, but still is there, right? And so Abuela
Right.
Sita is constantly on my mind as well. And so I do the Florida water, either sage or the Palo Santo.
Hmm.
Back in the day, I used to do the cigar.
Right here, we got the
Right,
sage and the Palo Santo today.
because Abuela Sita was a sort of like an eperetita. And so she would be one of the women in the community where people would come to her house and she would light the candles and do the readings and do the cleansings and stuff like that. And so
Love it.
I've inherited some of that I think is part of how I even do my clinical work, right? When I think about psychotherapy, those are some of the things that I've taken on. And then I put my beads on because Abuela Sita gave me my first beads,
Oh,
right? My first set of beads a long, long time ago before she passed on. And I actually lost that big set of beads at the beach when I was with my colleagues one time because I guess we was drinking way too much and stuff. So I just left it like on some beach chair, and so I put the beads on as well as an ownership of Abuela Sita in particular. This is for Abuela Sita, and so when I put the beads on, and so there's
mm,
various practices that I take on to ground myself in conversations around sort of the spirit world or loss and grief, but
yeah.
because we know that loss and grief or grief and loss is part of us losing our family members. We can't get
Right.
past that process, right?
Right.
Even though through time, um, well, it depends on the person. I can't speak for everyone, but for me, because I feel like the answers are always around me. The loss and grief lasts, but it doesn't. It's not prolonged. The suffering of it is not prolonged for me. That's
Right.
different for other people. So I just want to make sure that I'm sensitive about that. And so when it comes to
Absolutely.
like clients, how do I prepare them? Um, because of my own lived experience, some of the clients, a lot of them are black and brown. Most of all of them are black and brown. Um, they have similar cultural shared experiences, and so I normalize when they share with me that they had an ancestor come into their dream.
Mm,
Right, I sort of support them in exploring what is that, like what's that about, right? And then I share about my own lived experience, specifically with Mommy Helen and other ancestors that often visit me, and so I normalize it for them. Right, that's
mm,
part of the way our ancestors communicate with us.
yeah.
And ain't nothing pathological about that. Meaning,
Mm,
in a Eurocentric framework, if you go to a psychotherapist and share about the ancestors or praying to the ancestors of light and camp, whatever it is that we do, you could
right.
be pathologized over that.
Hmm.
Like, you sure you don't got like it looks like you fit the
Right.
criteria for schizophrenia. You
Yeah.
hearing voices?
Yep. Absolutely. Yeah.
but but that's not what it is for us. Okay. And so I
Right.
just want to, so just normalizing it is letting them know that, first of all, it's okay to grieve the loss of the people that you love when they are lost, when they do sort of cross over. And there's also ways that you can honor them through various practices. And I share my
Mm.
own with them as well. The same thing I just shared about the Florida water and stuff.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. And it goes to show how important it is to have culturally informed mental health professionals or just a culturally informed community around you, because there are different aspects to receive that healing, right? Like obviously people will resort to seeking a therapist, but it's so heavily ingrained in our culture that a lot of people like, oh, you're weak if you go to a therapist, or you're weak if you go seek help, but you see other folks kind of taking different channels of
Yeah.
expressing their traumas and things like that. And so I think whatever medium people choose to get help, it's
Uh-huh.
important that people are aware that it's, at least in my humble opinion, every time I've seeked out therapy, I made sure that I had someone who was either Black or Latina. And I also did have a Jewish therapist. She was just amazing. Like
She was killing it.
she was killing it. She was a queer, older Jewish woman who just like, we were bonded in some of the things that, our cultures have shared. But,
All right.
just like finding people who align with your values and
Yeah.
maybe share some of those cultural norms. And so I just think that's really important that you just shared that and normalize that. So, question, how would you say that the physical losses that you've experienced, would you say that that influenced your career choice or why you chose to go into therapy? Like, talk to the people about that. Like,
Yeah.
is there
Yeah.
any aspect of your grief story that influenced what you decided to do for your career?
I absolutely, look, here's the thing. One of the things I said earlier around, I talked about my mom sort of leaving me on the stoop, is because my family comes from poverty, right? And so we got to start in Brooklyn, New York, and Red Hook. That was like our home base for my mother's side of the family. And so we existed in poverty, which is obviously sort of an iteration of white supremacy. And we think about sort of the violence that came with that, the sort of addiction that came with that, sort of not eating the proper diets,
Right.
having dilapidated housing. I mean, living in the hood is really something that takes a toll on us physically, right?
Mm-hmm.
And as a result of that experience, with my mother's side of the family, a lot of my aunts and uncles died young,
Mm.
right? And they didn't get to live a life where they was able to like see their grandchildren and so on and so forth. That so many people sort of dream about when they have children. And a lot of my cousins were without parents, right? And so I understood in a way. I didn't have the language to describe what it was that my family was dealing with. I do now. I understand now. Um, First of all, I understood that something was off, right? When it comes to like, why is everybody dying around me? The people I love, like Theo and Titi and Theo and all of them, right? Like,
Yeah.
what's that about? Like, what is that about? And
Right.
so, and that's about how white supremacy functions when it comes to cutting our lives short. And it's because when we live in an environment that's dehumanizing, sometimes we take on coping ways of coping, right? Practices that further dehumanizes us and sort of has us take on practices that are self-destructive, right? And
Right.
so all of that plays a role in the legacy of my family and the experiences that um, they had to endure that ultimately led to sort of early death. And so what I could say about that is that there's suffering that's connected to that experience, to that lived experience. And so I was always curious about what is that suffering about for us,
Mm.
right? For Black and brown folk in particular. Like, what is that suffering about? And
Right.
so I always, because I also was suffering, right? There was a point in my life for a long time that I was suffering because of this experience. I was just curious about that. Like, it was like a philosophical conversation that I was sort of on a quest to understand what it was that we was dealing with. So I ended up basically in the self-help section of the library. to have a better understanding of what it was that I was dealing with, which obviously was influenced by my experience with my family as well. So there's no
Right.
separation. It's not like I lived on an island to myself. I'm surrounded by community who I've seen either die young or who are suffering and going through some stuff. Right.
Right.
That I didn't. So the self-help book section is where I ended up at in the library before there was even like a real self-help section, right? Because I was like back
Yeah.
in the day. So trying to understand the psychology behind our lived experience. But that wasn't enough because that was coming from a Eurocentric perspective.
Mm.
The sort of books that were written, right? They were written by people who were not living in the hood, who were
Right.
not dealing with the various iterations of white supremacy the way black and brown folk deal with it. And
Mm.
so that didn't speak to me
That part.
fully. Yeah, that whole part, right? So that didn't speak to me fully. So I ended up going to the Black History section of the library to figure out something about my people and where we come from to understand, well, something is off. The self-help book section is not really giving me the information I need. So let me go to the Black History section and see like if conversations around like liberation would inform me more. So somehow those two worlds came together.
Mm. Yeah.
Right? I took pieces from here, pieces from there. Then I had to like take pieces from my own lived experience because we got
Right.
to understand that as human beings, we're doing our own field research, even if you're
Right.
not a field researcher, because our lived experience informs us. And so, with all
Amen.
of my curiosity and my lived experience and understanding, plus I'm a journal writer, so I've always was self-reflective since I was 13 years old. So I've always
Mm.
been self-reflective and having these large questions as a child that I couldn't answer. So that sort of framed me or prepared me for the journey of looking for these answers around what we're dealing with as a community. And so, because of all of that, because of all of that suffering, it inspired me to want to do this work today, right? So it's
Mm.
very
I
much
love it.
part of my work. I also shared with you earlier about Abuela Cita, who she was like a pedetita. People will come to her crib and she would do all the readings and stuff. That's also inside of me. So my psychotherapeutic work is not just psychotherapeutic work that I'm doing. I am, obviously,
Right.
but there's that sort of other
It got that
component that's,
sazon. It got that sazon. It
yeah,
got the different aspects
right,
of it, you know?
right. And so there's that, because when I speak to clients, even for the first time, I go into their world and they
Yeah.
have no idea how, because I don't know them from a hole in the wall. And but
Right.
it's because I've learned to be in touch with something about their vibration that I can pick up on. But that
Right.
comes from that sort of lineage that I come from, right? Whether they're women or older men, sort of being in that world
It's like the
the
healing
spiritual
space, you know?
healing,
You're a
the spiritual
healer.
healing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm
Yep.
I'm I'm like low key supposed to be a shaman, but I wasn't. Unfortunately,
It's
I
the
wasn't
low key
born
for me though.
like
Wait,
I was
it's the
low
low
key,
key.
really low key. I'm supposed to be a shaman. Like I'm just saying,
You got to
but I
talk more about that though. Like how low key, how you supposed I need to know.
no, yeah, because the work that I do is, even though I'm dealing with the psychology, it's really spiritual work. I mean, it's spiritual, right? Metaphysical,
Mhm.
right? And how I sort of do my work is ultimately getting people to tap into their metaphysical self, right?
Mm.
I won't say spirit, right? But I do say metaphysical, which is vibrational. And so, as a result of colonialism, I wasn't born in the island of Puerto Rico, nor was I born in Africa. I was born in Brooklyn.
Mhm.
But if I was born in a village in Puerto Rico or in Africa, I probably would have been a shaman or a medicine man,
Mm.
right? That's the low key what it is,
Talk to
right? And
him.
so, so,
Mhm.
and so, and so, I know that that sort of spirit or that sort of divine calling is in me. And right now, in this context and where I'm at in my life currently, it looks like psychotherapy.
Mm. I love that. I truly like I resonate so much with that, right? I mean, that's a whole nother conversation for another day regarding like the colonization of what Puerto Ricans definitely have experienced. That's all, and Dominicanos like the whole yeah, that's a whole
All
nother
of us.
Afro Latinidad in general, like that's a
Yes.
whole yeah.
Yes.
Um, but with that, it's like having those ties to our lineage in the various ways. I agree with you, like similar to you. I feel like my mission on this planet, or like if I were in those spaces, right? If I grew up in those spaces, it would definitely be the combining of healing and the arts. Like that would
That's
be
right.
my jam all the time, right? And so, because I feel like I'm a creative first and foremost, but I've always been a healer. Like I'm that friend everyone comes to for advice, you know? I'm that person that's like, hey, like I don't want to talk about me right now. We're talking about you. Like, what are you going through? Like, you know, you got to listen to your people without trying to make it about yourself. And that's something I really want to pull out of that real quick, especially with this podcast. Like, I really want to center the stories. Like, obviously, I relate to these stories. That's the whole reason why, you know, I'm starting this, because I relate to this. But there's power in having people share their stories and normalizing the practice that when someone is sharing their story, you don't be like, oh, yeah, I understand. I went through that same thing. And then I talk about what happened to me. You know, that's like a big thing in therapy that I learned, you know, like when someone talks about themselves, you are there to kind of ask how you can support them in that moment and make it about them. And then obviously if something comes up in the conversation where, you know, you can talk about yourself, then do that, you know. But it's just normalizing the practice. We are here to, and that's another Eurocentric behavior that we learn. It's like everything's about us, everything's about the individual, everything is about just like loneliness is the number one, I think, epidemic in America,
Woo!
honestly. It
Is
really
it?
is,
Lord have
you
mercy.
know? And it's like really just, I think I'm seeing a big trend, and I love to see it. Big trend with, you know, I'll be completely frank with you.
Yeah.
I don't say black or brown people. I don't
Okay.
say, you know, BIPOC, because
Oh
who
yeah,
are
I
we
saw
talking
that. I
about?
saw that. Yeah.
I'm talking about Black people. I'm talking about Latino people. I'm talking about people who may identify as Arab or Muslim. Like anyone who is of that minoritized identity. We are not minorities. We have been minoritized, because
That's right.
really we are the global majority if you really think about it.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
Uh-huh.
So, with that though, you see this collectivist style of approaching, just community centric way of approaching problems. Literally, I think in a lot of places outside of America. And then when you grow up here, it's like everything is just, oh, me, you know? And it's just like really reframing that. Like, how can we all heal together? We all have things, we all have traumas that, you know, we don't really talk about the things that we are healing from. But how can we do it
Absolutely.
together and just like really
Yes.
normalizing that, you know?
No, listen.
So much. I know. I know. We were meant to meet, first of all. Like, this was just destiny. I was meant to meet you. I feel it. I
And
feel
by
it in
the
my heart.
way, I feel like you probably a low key shaman too, because you got a bunch of mushrooms behind you. I don't know what that's about, but it's giving me psychedelic vibes. I'm just saying, your background is just not your background because it is. You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
That's intentional. Okay,
Yes.
I just
A
want to
lot of
put that out
healing
there.
properties. Also, there's a big skull. So it's funny. So it's like a common, it's
Oh,
a, so there's like
okay. I see the
life,
skull now. I didn't see the skull before. Okay.
vibrant. Yeah, for the listeners tuning in, you have to watch on YouTube to kind of get the full experience. But it's flowers and mushrooms and life growing out of the skull. And it's just a testament that life continues after we die in the
Yes.
physical form. And
Yes.
also healing properties from plants and things. That's how we get life, you
Yes.
know, so all of that. So literally I saw
Hmm.
this and I was like, ooh, that's gonna be my background for my podcast.
And it makes sense.
So
It makes a lot of sense. It makes a
yeah.
lot of sense. Yes, absolutely. Perfect background.
Thank you.
Yes.
Um, so definitely want to hold space to talk about, you know, what would your, I'm just really curious. Okay, this is
Uh-huh.
kind of pivoting to what we were just talking about, but
Uh-huh.
I'm just curious for the different like funerals and memorial services that you've attended. Like, have you given thought about what yours would be? Like, what are some things, what's the vibe, what's the experience that you would want your personal memorial service to have? Like, yeah, like what would people wear? What would you wear? Like, what music would be played? Like, have you ever thought about that? And like, can you share a little bit about that? I know it's a very personal question, but like, it gives me
No,
life.
no, no,
If you're
but here's the thing. One of the things about me is that I'm so community oriented. And so I'm always gathering my people, specifically at my home, right? At my crib, right here where I'm at, sitting down right now. And I'm always inviting family over. Because here's the thing. Like, I noticed that, and it's going to be shady on purpose, but I noticed that certain family members will fly a fucking across the globe to go to a funeral, but they won't go to the next state or to the next town to go to your barbecue. And that really pisses me off, right?
That
Like,
is so
I
important.
don't even want to see you at no one's. Don't even be here. Why you wasn't at the barbecue that I've been inviting you to for the last 3 years? But you here at a funeral, crying. Did you think about seeing that person while they were actually alive? Did you attend whatever they invited you to, if they invited you to something? Right.
Yeah.
So my thing, so that's an interesting question because it triggered that for me.
Let's
Right.
talk about it. Yeah, that's powerful.
Like, I really like get upset about the fact that we only honor people after they're dead versus honoring them while they're still here.
While they're here.
Right. And so I'm a collector and gatherer of my community. Right. I be bringing people in like, yo, cuz over here, cuz over there, like my siblings, right? Like, I am really known for that because I believe in the sort of collective community experience because I'm not. So, because what you was describing earlier was through a white supremacist construct was individualism. We learned that from white supremacy. We got to remember we are village community people.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? We are supposed to be together in community, not separate, divided, and conquered. We're supposed to be unified. And so I practice that in my day-to-day life when it comes to my family members and the people who I love and most care about. I'm always creating spaces for us to be together, whether it's barbecues, whether it's holidays, and so on and so forth. And so when I think about if there was a moment that I would die, okay, you're gonna have. I want the same experience that you all had and that we all had while you in my crib. So that means you turning on the freestyle music, you're turning on the new jack swing music, okay? You're turning on all the music that we all grew up with, or for my generation, we grew up with that music, and it reminds us, and this music that never is timeless music, freestyle and new jack swing era. Like, that is timeless music. So we constantly play that music here, as well as some other new stuff and the salsa and stuff, but mostly freestyle and new jack swing. And that's what I want to be played at my funeral. And I want people that are having a good time, being as loud as they want to be, because that's what we do. We want to express ourselves and be self-expressed. That is completely appropriate. No fights and none of that negatives. We don't got time for that.
Right.
We love each other up, right? Because I do the same thing in this crib. Like, when I invite people over to my crib and I do my little gatherings and stuff, I'm all about loving people up. That's why, like, I don't know if I shared this during the podcast, but I did share with you earlier that I go around when my family comes around and I put the Florida water on them. You know what I'm saying? They're like this. They're waiting for the moment because the moment is going to come eventually. They're going to get the Florida water. But that's really my expression of love for them, right? Taking care of them and sort of thinking at the same time, honoring the ancestors and their practices and being like, we are all protected. We are all good. We are all loved, right? And I want that to be at my funeral, to feel like that. You know what I'm saying?
That's beautiful. Yeah.
And then take your little shots or whatever you got to do, smoke a little, your joints or whatever y'all do, because everybody does their own thing. And then cry a lot. I want you to cry a lot. Like, cry. Like, lose your breath over me. Because
love it.
Not because
it's the laughter.
Like, you better motherfucking cry. I want to see snots. Okay, snots. See, I want all of that. Like, be ridiculous. Throw yourself on the coffin, because that's what I would do.
Yeah.
For you. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And it's so crazy because recently a cousin of mine.
Love it.
Right? It's messy, but it's beautiful because that's how we get to grieve. Right? We don't have to be so, like, perfect and prim and proper. Like, people
Polished,
go and you don't even fuck out of here. Like, let's be like we really having a party to celebrate someone's life.
Right.
You know, they're no longer with us. They're over there in the coffin or in the box, wherever they're at. You know what I'm saying? Let's celebrate them fully. Let's not make this like, and there's nothing wrong with being proper and prim, but not at my funeral.
Time and place.
Even my most proper and prim titi better turn up. Okay? I'm just saying it. Because you never know when your time is coming. But if that happens, if it's soon or whatever, I'm not saying that it is. Better not be. You gotta be mad. But turn up, Titi.
Yeah.
The ones and she or they know who I'm talking about. They have saw this. Because it's really a celebration of the person that, we just lost, like to give them life, bring life into their funeral. I don't got time for like quietness and everybody's don't be well behaved, act up, don't fight, no violence. That's what I'm not. Because
Right.
some funerals people get violent and they start beating
Oh
each other
yeah.
up, and and I'm not talking about that. That's not me. Right?
Yeah.
I want us to love each other up. That's how I would see my funeral, in a long, sort of winded kind of way. That is the vision I have.
It's interesting. And thank you so much for sharing it because that's beautiful. Two things came to mind though, right? That it's usually ingrained in us, I think also from older generations as well. Like, oh, don't cry for me. Don't cry for me. And like I just love that you're so raw and so open about that. Like, now you better cry for me.
You
Like I'm
better
kind of the
cry.
same kind of the same way. And listen, I
Cry a whole
had
bunch.
cry feel all the feels however you want to feel them, but I won't be mad if you cry about me. But the other day I was actually getting breakfast with a good friend of mine. His name is, shout out to Jeremiah.
Hey, Jeremiah.
Hey, yes, we'll shout him out. And we've had so many conversations about how, just about this podcast, about grief, about loss, right? Because his wife really resonates with everything that we're talking about today. And the other day he was having a conversation with his son, and he's younger. I think I forget which son it was that said it, but he's younger. He's a child, and he said, Dad, funerals, right? Like the word fun is in
Mm.
funerals. It's a funeral. So I
Oh.
I want people to have fun at my funeral. And like I was like, yo, he's so young, and look at him, like that's already his like mentality. And it goes to show though that the younger generations now, like Gen Alpha, Gen Z. I'm stuck between Gen Z and millennial. So I'm called a zillennial. I'm like that hybrid
Oh, that's
generation.
kind of interesting.
Yeah, and then there's, you have Gen X, and then baby boomers, and then so on and so forth. But I think it's just interesting that the younger the generations are, like the people that are growing up, are so normalized by this because death has just been so in our face all the time, that I don't know, I'm just like really thinking about that. I'm like, yo, he's on to something. Like let's plan our funerals, y'all. Like,
Yo, for real though.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. No, I think, because look, here's the thing. You know, death is not easy, right? I mean, it's not. It fucking sucks when somebody that we love dies. I mean, I've experienced death over and over and over and over again
Same.
when it comes to my close family members and friends and so on and so forth. And so, um, but it's part of life. It's gonna happen
Right.
eventually, right?
Right.
It's somebody's turn is next, whether it's our turn or someone else's turn.
Right.
And so, and I think, for me, like, because I believe in the spirit world, I don't ever feel like they're gone. I mean, forever, or I don't feel like, even though they're gone physically, I'm real clear that there's another realm outside of what I can perceive through my sort of limited perception as a human being, right? And so I
Right.
feel like there's a transition that happens that I'm really confident about and is comfortable with acknowledging. So
Mm.
that, and so to have fun at a funeral, I mean, especially if it's their vibe as well, like, because it might not be their vibe, so then you might be
That's
like
true. That's
bored.
very true. That's very
Yeah,
true.
they might be boring people in real life, and I wouldn't. If you boring and you die, I'm not going. I'm just not going because I'm gonna be bored. But if they are fun
I can't do
personalities,
with you.
yeah,
I
no,
can't.
it's true. Like, don't die if you boring, because then I'm gonna be like, nope, I'm gonna be bored. So it also depends on the vibration of the person and how they showed up in life to sort of celebrate them in that way as well. I think it's
Yeah.
important. Yeah.
Honor how they want to be honored. Um, but I mean, but it's a very true statement that there are going to be people that tune into this that are not necessarily kind of open to this metaphysical world or concepts that we're talking about, or open to the idea of the spirit world. And I just also want to normalize that as well, right? Because everyone has different ways of processing on how they connect with their loved ones, if at all. But if you're not, definitely this is a reminder to do that in whatever way makes sense for you. But do you have any thoughts about that for people who are kind of not as open to the metaphysical world? Like, how would you, as a therapist, kind of advise them to honor their loved ones or talk about or honor their grief?
it's so hard because I feel like because I primarily work with Black and Brown folk, or people of African descent, like this is part of our cultural language, the
It's
spirit
true.
world and ancestors. So I don't necessarily uh have those. I don't have to have those conversations really,
Very
right?
true.
There's not many people that I engage with through a therapeutic sort of lens that are not already aware
Open to
of
that.
the ancestor
Got
world
you.
and so on and so forth. So so yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't know.
Yeah,
Maybe
that's
I'm just not the
A-okay.
right therapist for you.
And you know what? That's kind of exactly where I was hoping you would say, because it's important to find healers or therapists, mental health professionals that align with how you align. But I also just want to, just take time to normalize that it's okay. It's not for everyone, but it
Right.
is important to understand that these things are so heavily ingrained in Latino cultures, Afro Latino cultures, African, Caribbean, right? Like it's so ingrained in our
It's
cultures.
like
And
so. It's
so,
like yeah.
and I
Absolutely.
love that you talked about that today. I love that you talked about that today, because it's like it's just validating. Um
Yes.
but
And can I?
yeah, go ahead.
I just
Yeah,
want to say
absolutely.
something to like add another layer to that because I think this is important. When it comes to my own journey, because I think people probably have similar journeys. Because of the experiences that I had with religion, specifically Christianity growing up, I
Mm,
was turned off, really turned off to conversations around that, right? That whole, which I describe as mythology today. And because there was a lot of harm that it caused me and my community members that even though they still believe in the Christianity. Nothing against that. I'm just saying, for me, it was traumatic when I think about like how Christianity, the role Christianity played in my life, as a person who felt more connected to my abuela, who was more into the orishas and the
mhm,
African spirituality. And so, as a result of my experience with Christianity and sort of the way people who were in the Christian faith spoke about through their anti-black sentiments about my grandmother, it turned me off to all religion and all spirituality. So at one point in my life, I was an atheist.
mhm,
I don't believe in shit.
mhm.
Period. The end.
Yeah,
Right? I really was like, I don't believe in God. I don't believe in the spirit world. I don't believe in nothing because I was getting so many mixed signals and nothing felt right for me. Like nothing affirmed me. Right? It all felt like political or politicized, or it felt very sort of contradictory. Like some people believe, some people that like. Why are you bashing the Orishas and then when they're not bashing your Christianity, like and so on and so forth? Like it became this weird. So I just became an atheist. I was like fuck everything. Like I'm not. I don't
yeah,
believe in shit. But you know what
yeah.
happened was because the ancestors kept coming into my dreams,
Mhm,
right? My loved ones, like as a regular routine, I could no longer call myself an atheist because my ancestors forced me
mhm,
into sort of recognizing the spirit world.
mhm,
It was, no matter what I did to stay an atheist, I couldn't. Maybe
mhm,
I'm no longer I can't think about religion as something that I would assign myself to, right, or commit my life to. But I definitely feel like the ancestors took me out of that atheism conversation because there's no denying them. I mean, Mami Helen, like you stay haunting me, right? There's no way I could deny that experience. It is what it is. And so there's
yeah,
no way I could call myself an atheist with Mami Helen still there when all of
mm,
the ancestors are still around me. It's so interesting because I live where I live in the particular town that I live in, New Jersey. Before I lived here, I didn't realize that I was moving to a community where the cemetery where my ancestors are buried is right down the block. I didn't know that.
Whoa,
I didn't know
whoa,
that.
wow.
Okay. And
That's
so I realized it after I moved here. And I remember one time I was getting acquainted to my home and I was in my back room and I was having a moment and I literally sensed all of my ancestors standing in my backyard because the backyard is basically, if you keep going, is where the cemetery is at. I didn't know that at all
wow,
until I moved here. So it was like I was supposed to live here. And then because of the
wow,
ancestor, the work that has to be done with the ancestors, I believe.
wow. Listen, my brain is rapid fire right now. Like you just said so many things that I think so many people will relate to. And what I would love to honor from that as well is the fact that, you know, a lot of us do have that trauma by religion, right? It's just like this another form of indoctrination. Like I definitely do feel that faith is a really big grief home or coping mechanism on how people deal with their grief. And I think that's beautiful. Like, you know, have your faith, have the things that you believe in, right? I don't think there's one right way to live your life, right? Like all of us have different ways of living. And if faith, you know, by with whatever branch of religion or, you know, yeah, any religious practice that you adhere to, like do you boo boo, like that's it, that's fine. We all have our different ways of living. um but something that I really appreciate that you said, because not a lot of people talk about that, is that religious based trauma, and that it kind of disconnects us from what is God. Like God, you know, he wasn't there for me when, or she, you know, a lot of people think God is woman now. Like where was God when I was at my lowest points? Like why did God let me go through those things? Or like you always hear, oh, but God is just testing us. But like why is he putting us through this test in order to prove how strong I am, right? So those are some of the things that I definitely realized through growing up is a lot of religious trauma. And so I kind of just like, my mom actually is atheist, and my dad that raised me was between being agnostic and a Buddhist. So I had a lot
Mm,
of exposure to different types of thoughts, practices, while also going to church with my godmother. Like I grew up in the
mm,
church. I was in the
mm,
choir, like, you know,
mm,
so for
mhm,
me, I'm grateful for that experience, that even though my mom was an atheist, she allowed
mhm,
me to kind of go through my own journey and kind of like explore what made sense for me. But after trauma, after trauma, after trauma, I was like, I'm good with this. I'm good with all that, you know? And then I
yeah,
just feel like I
mhm,
kind of closed myself off to everything. But
mhm,
similar to you,
mhm.
a lot of signs in my dreams and just weird messages and signs that I would get. And I'm like, nah, like there's definitely something else out there. And so
Yeah,
I don't know what it is. Like there's no, you know, I think that we, out of the human brain, we only use an X amount of percentage of our brain. Like I definitely think that
mhm,
if we allow ourselves to tap in whatever
mhm.
way that looks like, I don't know. I think beautiful things
No,
would be
yeah,
discovered, you know? So
absolutely. And even thinking about that in that way, like when like this, it is what it is, right? Like sort of being tapped in and sort of thinking about the ancestors of what's beyond life. Like, first of all, that is a beautiful sort of a way that we can be reminded of the possibilities that we have in life, right?
mhm,
What is possible in life? What can we manifest? And if this is not it, right? There could be a possibility that there's something else. Then how do we use that knowingness to sort of make this a beautiful lived experience, right? What can we
beautiful.
do to manifest an experience that really um, has that same magic, right?
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
in some ways, the spirit world and thinking about the spirit world, there's a magical element to that, right? This
Mhm.
sort of supernaturalness around that sort of reminds me of how magical life is already. You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
And so, just if, for people that do sort of who are tapped into, that's a sort of being present to the magic that really
Yes.
life is. This
Yes.
magical, because imagine this, right? You and I, we're having this conversation, but there's no way that you nor I can explain what's the life force in us that is allowing us in this moment to
Right.
be alive, to
Right.
have this. Like, what? There's no battery. As last time I checked, I'm not plugged into a wall. How is it that this organic being, this sort of natural sort of being that came from the earth, is like walking around existing and experiencing life? That shit is magical as fuck.
Listen, I just appreciate everything you said, because that's literally why I started Grief Sense. Like, and everything you just described is Grief Sense to me. It's like I feel that especially, and I say this pretty frequently, but like after experiencing so many losses, I feel like it does allow you to tap into a consciousness that you might have not had access to before. And that manifests differently for other people, right? Other people are just completely shut down from it. They don't want to hear anything about that. They don't even want to connect with their loved ones. And that's fine. It's a very normal response, but definitely needs some help in healing through that. But for those that are kind of open to that and that healing process, like for me, it's a reminder that, we're only here for a limited amount of time in the physical form, right? What can we do to maximize this experience? And like, like
Mm.
you said, grief, you're gonna have days where it's debilitating, where it's hard. Like I cry so much all the time, but with that, I think it's beautiful because I'm allowing myself to feel, I'm allowing myself to connect with the memories of people that once walked this earth physically. And with that, it's a
Yes.
reminder that because they are, I am. They
Mm.
lived presently, and it's just a reminder that I do feel that I am kind of living through multiple people. And a lot, kind of similar
Yes.
to you, a lot of people in my life have died at a very young age. So I feel like
Mhm.
there's this pressure that I put on myself that I
Mhm.
want to accomplish so many things in such a short amount of time before I die, so
Mhm.
that way I can honor the people that have died. And hello, griefsense, like literally I did this so I can, at least this was like one of my biggest goals before I died, was to create
Mm.
this podcast, because
Mm.
now my family can have something of me when I die, but also
Mhm.
it's a way to honor my ancestors and then my guests' ancestors,
That's right.
also.
Yes.
So I'm just so grateful that you said all of that, because I was like, yes, like this is everything that I feel and say all the time. So I just thank you for that. But like also I do want to bring it back to you and your story, because you talked a lot about this theme of dreams, right? And how that can
Uh-huh.
connect you to the spiritual world. And so
Uh-huh.
what we do here in Grief Sense, we talk about, how can we channel our grief through creative expression, right? And so a lot of that, and you talked about that you journal. I'm a big journaler, journalist, I don't know, myself. And so I love prompts. Like I love these really big open-ended questions that we can really just think about and answer, like whatever comes to mind. And so I definitely want to bring that
Mhm.
with you and your story. So your prompt that you chose for today was to talk about or reflect on a dream that you had with the loved one that has died in your life, and to kind of share your thoughts on it. Like, what do you make of these? And you've had multiple dreams, so I don't know if you
That's yeah,
how
that's
you
the
want to take
thing.
that, but what are
I
some thoughts?
yeah. That's it. I think for me, like first of all, back to Mommy Helen, like Mommy Helen has been a consistent sort of presence in my life, even in death, right? Even after she died. Like she's literally in my dreams all the time, like all the time, like all the time.
Yeah.
Like I'm like, you know what I'm saying? And so, I don't how I don't. There's no real way that I make sense of that, but it's almost like back to like this conversation I was having with you just a few minutes ago around it. It forces me to surrender to um to the knowingness that there's something beyond this life, right? Because you can't deny, like it can't be denied. I can't deny it. Like I know what I know, right? Based on my experiences. And in those dreams, I'm being visited by my ancestors, right? Starting with
Mm.
Mami Helen. First and foremost, Mami Helen is the number one haunter of my dreams. She haunts me constantly, right? And so, here's an interesting thing I want to sort of bring to your awareness that I didn't share. In November of 2022, my best friend died, right? One of my best
Mm.
friends died. And the day before, okay, so I had a dream. He came into my dream. Um, and he was already sick, right? He was already dealing with health issues. But he came into my dream one particular night. And that, when he came, first of all, we haven't been cool for mad years, right? Even though in theory he's my best friend, but in practice we haven't been cool for mad years. Okay, so, but he came to my dream in one particular night. I believe it was November 7th or whatever it was, the day before my mom's birthday. Not Mommy Helen's, but my biological mom. And so I quickly went to Facebook, and the next day when I got up and reached out to his sister, and I said, "Yo, your brother came into my dreams," and she was like, "He's in hospice right now, and he's experiencing the death rattle." Which
Mm,
the death rattle is when a person is on the way out, like they're not breathing right, and so there's
yeah.
like a rattling sensation that happens.
Hmm.
So I knew. So first of all, he came into my dreams because he was on his deathbed,
Wow.
right? And so, and I instinctually knew that because I know that the dead, they come to my dream. Even the people who died last week, they be in my dreams the week after,
Right. Right.
right? Like my other cousin who passed away, um, previously before that, like a year before that, he also came into my dream after death, right?
Wow.
And they don't just come in my dreams because I'm thinking about them. They're coming into my dreams because they're letting me know that
What
they're
a
okay,
gift.
so I could give it
Yeah.
back to my family members. You know what I'm
Right.
saying? So it's not
Right.
like, oh, I'm just thinking about them. Not because there's other people that don't come into my dreams because they don't fuck with me like that after they die,
Right.
right? And so then I spoke to the sister through Facebook, and then the next day, which is my mother's birthday, I went to his place, to his hospice unit where he was sort of in the bed, tubed up. He wasn't conscious for many days before that point. And I brought, because I know he's a spiritual dude, right? He's into the indigenous and the Native American stuff, and I brought some seashells and the floor of the water and the Native American music that I know he used to love back in the day. And this dude was trying to move out of his comatose state.
Mm,
Okay, like he wanted to talk to me, and that was the most movement he has made since he's been in. It was he was in the hospital for actually over a month at that point,
wow.
right? And so, but he was like making like I want to speak, I want to speak. Something in him was rattling,
Mm,
right, because of what I was doing for him, because I was honoring his way of his own sort of traditional way of doing
right.
things, right, for his
Right.
spirituality, and then he passed away a week later. Now, so interesting that he comes into my dreams now, and
Wow.
our friendship like went back to the purity that it was before our humanity took over the friendship, right? Our bullshit,
Wow.
right? And it's like in death, our friendship has gotten back to the source of who we used to be back in the day,
Wow.
because
That's so
he's
beautiful.
also constantly there, right? And so and this is not true for every person that
Right.
I've lost. They're not all in my dreams, but certain
Right.
individuals are who I consider my soulmates. And so he is in my dream, and we communicate back to in the way that we're back and reconnected to the source of our friendship, right? Like the
Mm,
love we have for each other. Like we love each
yeah.
other. Like we
That's
bros,
love.
like we best friends. And
Right.
that came back. And so,
Mm,
and that's the beautiful thing about death that we don't understand, is that ego bullshit that we deal
mm-hmm.
with here,
It's gone.
that
Yeah.
shit is gone.
Yeah.
That shit is gone. And it's funny because when my stepdad died many years ago, my brother's father, he came into my dream, and me and him did not have a great relationship, okay? But
Mm,
he came into my dream and he was like, Pito, because that's when they say, Pito, I've been suffering for so long and I didn't realize that I was holding on to stuff. Like the way he showed up to me in that dream, he was like, he told me almost like I didn't know why I was holding on to so much, and I apologize,
wow.
right? And it was
That's
so,
so
and I
beautiful.
knew like it was so, and that's the beautiful thing that I feel like I've learned around about death, is that shit that we deal with, that ego shit that began us
Yeah.
into our feelings and stuff, gone. Now
Yeah.
we're getting back to
Wow.
this, to the source of who we are, really, right? Our
Mm,
essence of who we are. And
yeah.
so dreams, that's what dreams remind me of, is like, who do I get to be today in life because of their death? Because they remind me I don't have to
Mm,
be driven by my ego. I can be driven by the source, the essence of who I am, which is love. You know what I'm
mm.
saying? And that's what my
Wow.
dreams tell me when I wake up the next day. I'm like, who I gotta love today?
Like, what's the message I got today? That is so, like, I love everything you said, and thank you so much for being vulnerable and for sharing that. And I think, again, a lot of people, I think, are going to seek some validation in everything that you shared, like if they have some dreams and were visited by some loved ones in their dreams. So thank you so much for sharing all of that and your interpretation. Honestly, I would probably get the same exact interpretations if it were me as well. So I just appreciate you. I appreciate our time together. I appreciate everything you shared today. And definitely want to give you the opportunity, as we wrap up here, how people can get plugged in with you. Like, where can they connect with you and get tapped into your work?
Yeah, absolutely. So again, I'm the founder of the Liberated Self Therapeutic Services. For more information on that particular mental health private practice, you can go to www.theliberatedself.org, or you can go to Instagram, which is my favorite space, and that's at the Liberated Self. All the things I'm up to, like in the moment, because that's constantly being updated, and I'm sharing, and I'm doing our IG live series, Unpacking White Supremacy and the Adverse Impact, and so which is a larger project. So you can find me there as well on
Awesome.
Instagram. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much,
Thank
Antonio, for your
you.
time. And I think this was a dope conversation. Definitely gave me a lot of life and a lot to reflect on today myself. So yeah, but thank you so much. And for everyone
Absolutely.
listening, thank you for tuning in. And don't forget to leave a rating on Apple Podcasts and on Spotify. And please feel free to like and subscribe on YouTube. Thank you so much. And we'll catch you on the next episode. Griefsense Familia, that wraps up another episode of the Griefsense podcast. If this resonated with you, please feel free to share with someone who will appreciate it and tell a friend to tell a friend. Also, I'm a firm believer that feedback is a gift. So, I'm just saying, I won't be mad if you decide to leave a review and a rating of your experience on the podcast so far. Also, let's help each other find community in grief, and let's amplify these stories far and wide. Thank you for tuning in. En solidarity y con mucho amor, Mimi.